press our agenda forward, especially when we're given such an audacious classroom as death. And this past Friday, Will's mom passed away. And we found her, she passed away in her sleep. And, you know, the last meal that we had with her was created by someone in this community. You know, you guys took care of us as we took care of you, but you guys took care of us, you know what I mean? Like, for the whole month, we had people bringing food, so we didn't have to think about it. And we got down to sit down and be with each other. And even someone from our community even made me an adult bib for Janine, and I never used it, so I'm returning it. But that was really sweet. I mean, the ways that we create love for each other is audacious, you know, and I cannot imagine not having this. And that's why when I moved here from California, I felt so disenfranchised and broken and torn because I didn't have my tribe, you know, and so part of the reason that we created this community was so that we would have a place to belong. And if you find a place to belong here, all the better, you know, because it's such an important thing to feel like you belong. Belonging is one of the key ingredients in a happy life. You know, when we feel like we don't belong, it's horrible. It's horrendous to feel like you don't belong to somebody. And the lovely thing is, and sometimes we've been disenfranchised by our own spiritual communities that have said, you don't belong here because you did such and such. You know, I had that experience when I got divorced. And I did not want to leave where I came from. You know, one of the hardest things we do is leave our own tribe. And sometimes we get pushed by pain, and sometimes we get pulled by vision. And it doesn't matter how we go, it's just that we know that God is with us every step of the way, even in the dark hours, even in the rough patches. So today, instead of talking about you know, walking majestically, which is my favorite subject, I say that about everything, don't I? I just love to talk. We're going to talk about the gift of the experience of moving through life and death. And before we begin, before we give each other a hug, I wanted to tell you a few things that happened last week. Aside from the news that Janine passed away, we also had good news. We got a write-up in the newspaper for our community, and we really looked great in print, you know? And it was really nice. So we have some copies on the back table if you wanted to take a read of that. And it would, you know, I'm going to make copies. I just didn't get to it this week. So it's a really lovely way to explain to your friends, this is what I do on Sunday morning if this is your spiritual home. You made us not sound so much like a cult. We appreciate that. Though we will be serving Kool-Aid, just kidding. Last week we talked about tenfold and the magical power in tenfold. When you give something to someone who has less than you, the magic that comes from that it is returned to you tenfold. And to be brave enough to practice that. And before we give each other a hug, I wanted to share with you a story. Experiencing Hendrix, it's funny that you brought that up, because I experienced little Hendrix last week when he came here. He's our youngest, well, one of our youngest, in our community. And after the sermon, for the talk, his mom, Kathy, was saying to him, tenfold. You're saying to Cherie, tenfold, tenfold, tenfold. And I was like, what are you doing? She says, you won't believe what happened this morning. And I said, what? She said, well, before he came to church, Hendrix had this little teeny balloon, and he was devastated when he woke up because it had shrunk a little bit. Yeah, and so she said, you know, and I said to him, balloons are meant to be enjoyed in the moment, Hendrix. But he kept crying. And then his other mom said to him, Hendrix, there's more than enough balloons in the world. There's more. You're going to find more balloons. But he just kept crying. He was inconsolable. And so his sister Cherie had a balloon that was a little bit more plump than him, and she gave him her balloon. You know? And as you know, none of us could have suspected that Al was going to spend half the morning blowing up balloons for our birthday celebration. But both kids left with a garbage bag filled with balloons. You know, for us it's the boy or the parking space or the shoes, but for that kid it was the balloon. You know what I mean? That meant everything to him. And so it's so beautiful that we get to see the principles working for the tallest and the smallest among us. Yeah. And if you click in here, that is available to you as well. So we're going to give each other a hug. Sure. Yeah. So this is a great opportunity to talk about life and death. It's one of the biggest fears that we have is the idea of life and death and things transitioning and transforming. And you know, grieving is an interesting thing as well. When my dad passed away, I was working down at the Bodhi Spiritual Center. And the next day was the Christmas pageant. pageant or the holiday pageant, and I had worked with these kids for like weeks to put on this show. And I was like, I gotta go do that. I gotta go be in the chaos of that and get these kids through the show because they trusted me, you know? And so I went down there and I was so pissed at God. And I was like, God, you know, I was saying, I will be blessed by this. I was like, I demand my blessing from this. You know what I mean? You gotta do what you gotta do to get through the hot hour, right? And the crazy thing is, I was sitting there, you know, in my grief before the kids show, and they were doing like this pageantry of having people come up and do readings. And the next thing I know, like the woman on stage is pointing at me and dragging me up on stage to do this reading. And I was like, what? And I was so in grief that I didn't, like I was like checked out a little bit. And I'm like, oh my God, like this is like a bad dream. And she put this thing in front of me, and it was about the sun returning. Actually, it was this goddess thing. And I remembered that this morning because I felt like, you know, how do you continue to show up when your heart's broken? And I know that when I asked for my blessing in that hour, like it informed this hour that says, yeah, you just do. You know, you just do. I mean, part of being a spiritual being is to show up. You know, showing up is so important. It's part of being a warrior. You know, if you study the fourfold ways, one of the most important things is to show up. If you don't show up, nothing happens. You know, so showing up is really important, and don't worry about what happens when you show up. Just show up with an open mind and an empty slate. So when I was in California and I started to work as a spiritual practitioner, I had this friend of mine who had two kids, and they were twins, and one of them had leukemia and passed away. And I walked them through this experience, and I remember thinking that when I was a kid, my mom died, like I couldn't comprehend the idea of death. And it sort of felt like trying to wrap an elephant in a gum wrapper. Like, it doesn't make any sense. It's hurting my brain. So I wrote this book. I think anything good, beautiful, and holy is actually written by God. So I was open to receiving this book for children about death. That's a big seller, huh? Children and death. What a great topic. But it helped me. It helped me to share it with them. So I'm going to share it with you today. And I'm going to thread through A Course in Miracles, which is my other book. You know, it's my backbone, my spiritual principles. And in A Course in Miracles, it says there's one life, and I share that life with God. If God is a trigger word for you, you could change that for love. There's one life, and I share that life with love. There are no different kinds of life. For life is like truth. It does not have degrees. It is this one condition in which all that God created shares. Like all of God's thoughts, it has no opposite. There is no death because of what God created shares his life. There is no death because an opposite to God does not exist. There is no death because God and you are one and will always be one, and that's the eternal truth. And though we will move in and out of forms, it doesn't change the constant beneath it. So the story that I wrote was called The Life and Death of a Sandcastle. And it starts with this. I'll begin with my birth, a fine place to begin. When I first landed here with a bump and a spin, I came on this huge wave as it crashed to the shore. I arrived here on Earth from the great ocean floor, just a clump of wet sand. Nothing more, nothing less. I felt scared and alone as the ocean regressed. I showed up as a splat, not at all as I planned. Dismissed from the sea with a wave of its hand. Good luck, little guy. Make the most of your stay. You'll return to us soon. Your life's only one day. So that's where we start to get triggered, isn't it? That there's an expiration date on this experience. One day, that was all? But I don't understand. Well, that's as long as you live, said the sea to the sand. Oh, but one day seems too little and too short and much too brief. But the sea only smiled as it rushed past the reef, so in the dark and the beach I let out a faint cry. One day? That was all? But there came no reply. So, as I said, though our spirit is eternal, this experience is temporary. You know, although the body comes and goes, the spirit is eternal. But we get scared because we forget that we're actually spiritual beings having a physical
experience. We start to think I'm a physical experience who every once in a while gets to have a spiritual experience on Sunday morning or after a yoga class or whatever. But the truth is, you are a spiritual being, and you're pressed into the parentheses of this experience of life. But you will go on way before, after it, and you've been here way before it. This is just a little teeny classroom that you come in, you experience love, and then you get to move forward. And you will be blessed. So, the little sandcastle, he's on the beach, and he's like, gosh, I only have one day. Good information. What am I going to do with this very limited time? So he says, so I sat on the beach where my life had begun, and I watched the great sea as it birthed forth the sun. Oh my goodness, good golly, gee whiz, what a sight. With one wink of the sun, there was no longer night. Now I had swum with the starfish, I had danced with the sharks, but never had I seen the sun banish the dark. And in that moment I felt my whole body exhale. This sight held more weight than a great spotted whale. You ever watch the sunrise on the beach? I mean, we all pay a lot of money to go to places where we can watch the sunrise on the beach, right? And it's like, just let me live here. I mean, all of us have a vision board with sunrise on it, I want to live on the beach and watch the sunrise. That's beautiful, but there's something even more beautiful than that, is watching the sun rise in each of us. When you see a friend move past a place where they have said for sure that they're broken, no, you don't understand. I'm broken here. I'm bad here. This was not good. This was not okay. When you see somebody wake up to a blessing in that situation, it's audacious. When you see in yourself the transformation of something that sought to kill you, and you rise from it, that is true power. And we each will have that opportunity. You'll be able to tell what your spiritual awakening is by the degree of your happiness. If you get strung up and hung up by ego and by fear and by limitations, you're going to stay stuck in a very hard and uncreative place. But each of us are called to move through that and get to see that light that lives within us will be the very thing that heals us. So not only for ourselves, but for everyone we come in contact with. You ever been with somebody who's just shut down in frigidness? It's, there's nothing you can do really but continue to shed your own light. So the little sandcastle, he says, in A Course in Miracles it says, there's a light in you which cannot die. In this other part of the Bible that didn't make it into the Bible, it's called the Gospel of Truth, it says, this is the perfect day, and within you dwells a light that cannot fail. So a lot of philosophies say the same thing. There's a light within us that cannot fail. There's a light within us that cannot die. And in this section of the Course in Miracles from 156, it's one of my favorite lessons. It says, all things that live bring gifts to you and offer them in gratitude and gladness at your feet. The scent of flowers is their gift to you. The waves bow down before you. The trees extend their arms to shield you from the heat and lay their leaves before you on the ground that you may walk softly while the wind sinks to whisper round your holy head. When I was a kid, holy heads were reserved for Jesus and all the other angels and saints. But today we get to recognize we each have this holiness about us, and we can activate it by recognizing we are good and beautiful and holy. If that's the truth for you, how are you going to walk? A Course in Miracles says that we've been given 1,000 reasons to gladden ourselves, like this reading just said. Everything's blessing you, everything's for you. I remember when Reverend Beckwith said in a sermon that Will and I were at, nothing is against you, everything is for you. I was like, what is he talking about, everything is for me? I was so immersed in my victimhood, I was like, well, that's not true, until I decided that it was true. And then I got to see how the world did bend toward me if I decided that that would be my truth. Jesus says it's done unto us as we believe. I had to change my thinking, not the outside world. So as we recognize that truth, that light that lives within us, and cultivate that, we not only bless ourselves, but we bless everyone around us. So, and we get to be dazzled by nature. The ego, A Course in Miracles says you've been given 1,000 reasons to gladden yourself, and you refuse them all. Who's been there? Me. I've been there sometimes. Well, what it doesn't say to us is that the ego will give us 1,002 reasons to complain. So that's why we got to struggle with it. That's why we got to wake up early and say, no, today, even though the ego speaks first and loudest, I am turning on my light, no matter what. no matter if cancer knocks, no matter if my mother-in-law dies, no matter what, I am here to be light. So you can get fierce with it, you know what I mean? I think you need to sometimes. The little sandcastle says, I bathed in its beauty. The warmth was so grand, and that's when I felt it, the first child's hand. Like a small school of fish, they all fluttered about. Let's make a sandcastle, I heard one of them shout. And then I was lifted and held, and molded and shaped. With their shovels and pails, I was primped and landscaped. Encrusted with fan shells, dressed up in sea glass, they drizzled and patted till their sandcastle was cast. And stepping back, they admired the work they had done as I stood in the warmth of a mid-morning sun. When we come to this human experience, we're greeted by our teachers. Our teachers are our parents and our siblings and our co-workers, and they will primp and prune you. And you're going to hate them for it, or love them for it, depending on which they're doing. If they're primping, you're like, yeah, I am that good. And if they're pruning, it's like, ow, that hurt. But we're also here to primp and prune each other. And when we think about that, it's actually a very beautiful thing we do for each other. We raise each other up. When we're doing it from a place of love and in generosity, it's always about primping. When we're doing it from a place of trying to get something, it will cause us and the other person to feel broken. So we want to always, recognize, what am I doing this from? Am I doing this from love or fear? Am I doing this to express, or am I doing this to control? And if you ask those simple questions, you'll be able to stay on course with your happy, joyous, and free. So the little sandcastle, he begins to see himself, as we do, as separate. And he says, from out of their buckets with water inside was mirrored to me a sight so dignified, surrounded by love and praise and attention. My small clump of sand had a whole new dimension. I could barely believe the water's reflection, but since the sea never lies, I gave no objection. My shape was so regal, my structure so splendid, my eyes filled with tears as my spirit ascended. Look, Mama, look, Papa, the little one yelled. My heart was aglow as the sea softly swelled. And from all of the sea creatures and all the vast seas, I had not ever once seen a something like me. And in reverence, I took in this new suit that I wore. I was dressed up first class from the peaks to my floor. And isn't that funny how we do fall in love with ourselves, And isn't that okay that we do appreciate the way that we have been expressed and the way that we get to cultivate and carve out the truth of ourselves. And we are good and beautiful and holy. The problem happens when we begin to think that is based on a form. Because just like that sandcastle, things start to shift here, just when you start to get comfortable. We live on the sands of time, and things are ever shifting and changing and shifting and changing. We like to say we're in a classroom, and Pam likes to point out that we're in a playground, and sometimes it's a sandbox where we got to learn how to share each other's tools, and we got to not get addicted to the specific sandcastle. If you wanted to get addicted to the sandcastle, you would have to bring cement to the sandbox. And who wants that? That would just ruin everything, because creativity would be out the window, right? So we have to be open to the ever-shifting changings of life. So it's the afternoon now, it's in the midday, and then from out of the distance there comes a strange chime. The children all froze, and one screamed out, lunchtime. They dropped all their shovels and started to run, leaving me all alone in the afternoon sun, alone in my greatness without worry or fret. I arrived, I was grand, I was brilliantly set. There were folks to impress, there were things to be done, there were sights to be seen, there were contests to be won, and I stood there, believing my footing secure when from out of the sea came a wave from the shore. Remember when that happened the first time? You're like, oh, what? What was that bitch slap? What was that blind side? It's like, why did that happen? Waking up to find my mother-in-law. I was like, what? Most of the time I go, not ready. I'm not ready for this, God. And God's like, yeah, you are ready. You got this. Sometimes people come to us and say, I'm not ready. And we get to say to them, you are ready, because you're here by right of consciousness. You were ordained for this moment. So you got this. And you're going to want to tell the whole world how you don't got this, because we love to sing harmony with the ego, who loves to sing about lack and limitation. But today we're going to go, I am ready. I am ready. So get out of my way, ego, and anybody else who tried to get in my way. So, blindsided. Then the shifting sand and one strong gust of wind, and my roof started to slide, and my walls became thin. My goodness, good golly, it all happened so fast. And doesn't it, though? It happened so fast. With one, my whole front was blasted with one mighty sand blast, and I blinked the salt water away from my eyes. I looked out at the sea, and to my surprise, what I saw seemed so scary, so massive, intense, and I wished that the children had built me a fence. You know? It's like we start to forget our source. And even when our source calls us back, we go, not ready. I don't even recognize that I'm this holy being, that I'm this greater possibility. You know, I want to stay stuck in my littleness. I want to stay stuck in the five limited senses of this experience. You know, the body, it's although it's wonderful to drive around in the experience of your body, it's limited to 5 senses. Do you know how many senses spirit is limited to? None. There's no limitation. So as we continue to cultivate this awareness of our spiritual being, we literally get to awaken and vibrate at a more audacious experience where we're in holy communion with everything. And it's beyond sound and sight and touch. It's a communication that's revelatory. And they say in the Course that, you know, between you and I is the miracle. The miracle is a place where love has never been before, and we get to experience that. But between you and your divine is revelation, you know, where you get to have what is wordless. And it even says, like, you might have these experiences where you're going to try to explain to your friend, and I've had enlightened people try to explain to me their revelations with God, and I'm like, I get it. It sounds boring. You know? Because it's not meant to be shared. It's no way you could share it anyhow. You know? It's like you kind of have to just hold that in yourself and know that for yourself. We've all had them, or we've all had somebody share them with us, and you know, it's best to not share the experience, but to share the effect of the experience. And that means that you should be moving in greater love if you have enough of those experiences. So, I'm not sure if I read this part already. Oh yeah. With each wave of water, with each gust of air, my beauty was faded, my walls became bare. Come home, cried the sea, come to my embrace. No, please no, I called out. My heart started to race. I do not wish to go. I'm happy here, I do not wish to go. But my plea got swept up in the strong undertow, and a huge ocean wave pulled me back to the sea. A strange cry filled the air. It was coming from me. And then all my parts were dispersed, all my hinges unhinged. I felt torn and confused, violated and infringed. And that's when we start to get pissed. Right? How dare you take the very thing that I have been with my entire life? My life. Like, how dare you take my life? I don't know myself beyond this life. And we are immersed in the fear of the unknown. And we cling to this with all we have, you know? And we get really pissed at the idea that we have to leave our loved ones. You know, that we're going on this voyage with just us and God. It's horrific. If you don't get through that with a bit of anger, you know, God bless you. But we all experience a little bit of that, you know, a little bit of fear. So, knowing that, the way we can move through that is with grace, with just a little more gentleness. Gentleness helps us. And so when we feel that way, gentleness means we pull back in speed. We go at a slower pace. We go at the pace of peace. When you're around people who are mourning, they say, I feel like there's like a billion-pound woman sitting on my chest, you know? And if that's the truth, you know, you're going to move slower. That makes complete sense. And that's how we take care of ourselves and others. But then in that moment of anger, when you're just right there, you know, Spirit comes, and this little sandcastle says, just then the sea whispered, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay. Just let go. Relax in the peace of life's ebb and life's flow. And the sandcastle says, I can't say it was graceful, I'd be a pretender, but peace finally came when I learned to surrender. You know, to let go, to let God, to to have grace, to let grace wash over you. We say these words all the time, but it's not until we get to the classroom where we're clinging and we're fighting for our limitations that we really get to learn how to let go. And it's not an easy classroom, but you know when you're on the other side of it, energy opens up in ways that you didn't even know you were withholding. So it's like you're just kind of wrestling with God, and God always wins. Damn it. And then, when you get to the other side of it, the little sandcastle says, and then I felt freedom, and all around me was song, and I swirled in the bliss of no right and no wrong. And my heart filled with gladness, for it seemed I survived. In truth, I discovered I was still so alive, immersed in such beauty, such love, and such light. My fears quickly faded, replaced with delight. I don't know about you, but every single story I hear about somebody who's died and come back, they're like, that was awesome! Like, I can't wait to go on that ride again. You know, my dad died when we were younger. He got mugged. And he went up to heaven and he saw his mom, and she was kind of like an angel. And she was like, welcome, James. And he was like, I got 8 kids to feed. I got to go back to Earth, you know? And she was like, okay. You know? And then he came back down. But from that time on, he really lived unencumbered. He was like, you know, just be happy. Like, do what you love and just be happy. And I remember Will came to visit us one time, and he was like, your dad. Like, I've never heard a parent like that, just like, you could do whatever you wanted as long as you're happy. You know, I think it was stemmed from the fact that my dad was unencumbered by the conditions and illusions of the world. You know what I mean? So he got kind of blessed by his experience of being mugged, you know? The little sandcastle says, so I let go and relax in the great ocean of Om. A sandcastle is nice, but it's good to be home in this heaven of homes where there's no endings or beginnings, for love never dies. It just goes on living. And that's the same thing that the Course tells us. It says, nothing real can be threatened and nothing unreal exists. So nothing real can be threatened. That's the love that we have for each other. Nothing unreal exists. That's everything else. And herein lies the peace of God, it says. So we can rest in peace before we die. Wouldn't that be nice to rest in peace before we die? I have one little poem that I'm going to read to you, and then we'll have a conversation. And this is a poem that you hear often at funerals, and I just think it's so beautiful. And it says, it was from Bishop Brandt. He says, what is dying? And he says, I'm standing on the seashores, a ship sailing I'm standing on the seashore, a ship sails in the morning breeze and starts for the ocean. And she is an object of beauty. I stand and watch her till at last she fades on the horizon. And someone says at my side, she's gone, she's gone, she's gone. And from my sight, that is all. But she's gone where? For I know that she is just as large in the mast, in the hull, and as fair as she was when I saw her, and just as able to bear her load of living freight to its destination. And the diminishing size and the total loss of sight is in me, not in her. And just as that moment when someone at my side said, she's gone, there is someone standing on another shore, watching her coming, and another voice taking up a glad shout. Here she comes. Here she comes.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you want more tips and tools on how to be a spiritual vixen, go on over to my website, MaureenMuldoon.com, and you can sign up for my love notes. Until then, I'm Maureen Muldoon, the spiritual vixen, reminding you to love more, fear less, and don't forget to laugh.